Welcome to Modern Aikidoist Podcast. Before we start, I want to thank everyone who has supported the show, and in particular those of you who have contributed to the PayPal tip jar. Of course, the likes, subscribes, and shares help a great deal as well. I enjoy bringing you this content, and the contributions help cover the expenses for doing so. I've had a wonderful time chatting with the people on these shows, so much so that I would like to have them back for further conversations. As you listen, if there are any questions or topics you would like to hear us discuss, please post up a note in the comments or send me them directly. I'll pick the best ones and we'll cover them in future episodes. Another way you can get more content is to join the Spirit Aikido online program. There are currently more than 130 videos in the program, with new ones being added every few days. Subscribers get access to video training and mentoring to techniques and training methods that I've adopted from other martial arts to make my Aikido more practical. In the most recent series of videos, I cover troubleshooting Ikkyo, as well as a very interesting Ikkyo turnover. There's a link to the program in the description. I invite you to check it out. Now, on with the discussion. I'm very excited to have Ian Abernathy here on Modern Aikidoist Podcast. So welcome to the show, Ian. I'm very excited to chat with you. We're going to have a great time.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
You bet. One of the things, I came across some of your work years ago, and what really struck me was your acknowledgement that the way traditional martial arts training from your background was disappointing, and that you wanted to take a new path and you wanted to forge into something that really wasn't being done very much in the karate community. As I understand, as a karate, what style of karate was it?
I originally started in Wado, but I don't use that label anymore because I've had instructors from other influences, and I no longer think the style labels really apply. Sure. So I always say I'm a martial artist first, karateka second, and no idea what style I am. Yeah?
You know, and I think that's a great way to look forward to it, because Aikido is going through very much the same thing and has been for some time. And I think a lot of practitioners are having that sort of crisis of faith, questioning what they have gotten or where they're at and where they want to be. And I'm sad to say that some instructors are kind of shaming some of those people and making them feel like they should not be going outside the lines or taking their martial art into where they want it to be, which is to be practical for self-defense and that sort of thing. So that's why I was excited to chat with you, because, you know, I know a bit of your background, not a lot of it. Maybe you could share a little bit of that with people, but also the path that you went through in order to break out of those lines and to take your martial art where you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the things where I was really lucky, because I can relate to the what you're telling me. I hear that a lot from people in my community, that the groups that they belong to, the instructors that they work with, they have a desire to move things on a little bit, change things a little bit, maybe go back to older practices that are now no longer practiced. And then they feel for political reasons, for want of a better expression, that they're not allowed to do that. So they constantly come up against these hard stops. Fortunately for me, I never really had that. You know, I was very good that all the instructors I've had have been quite open-minded and has always been open to me cross-training and exploring things. So I was able to look at the art as I was practicing it, bring in disparate sources. I clearly wanted to go along the more self-protection line. I'm a little bit more open-minded than maybe I was about the benefits of the wider martial arts practice. But at the time, when I started off, you know, whatever this was, past 25 years ago, something like this, when I decided that I really wanted to kind of move down that pragmatic route, I didn't really feel that constraint from any of mine. In fact, they were very encouraging in me doing it. But I know within traditional circles, there is sometimes this view that the art, it was almost kind of divinely inspired and has reached a state of perfection and in no way can be altered or changed. So when I was looking at the art as was passed on to me, there were some things that I either wholly reject this practice or think that there are things that we can improve upon. And whereas my various instructors may not have agreed with every conclusion that I reached, they were happy for me to reach my own conclusions. Yeah.
Sure. You know, I ran across a great meme on the internet a few years ago, and it was a picture
of an axe, and the axe had a metal handle and a wooden head, and it said, "Just because you're unique doesn't mean you're useful." And I think that a great deal of traditional martial arts have painted themselves into that corner where they feel that they are right, they're correct, they're unique, they're different and better than everything else. But when you actually go to use them for what they are used for, there is catastrophic failure oftentimes.
Yeah, well, and I think as well, I think that ultimately comes down to if you look at arts like that tend to have a more honest reputation. So if you think of things like things like boxing and judo, you know what I mean? And I think that the big strengths that those arts have built into them is that there's a lot of empirical testing.
Yes.
And they test for what their predefined goal. Because, you know, sometimes people talk about, oh, you need to have live practice, but I always say that's not enough. It's what kind of live practice.
Right.
You know, I always say if you decided you want to be the world's best boxer, so you said, well, I've taken up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because they have live practice, it doesn't fulfill your aim. So if you wanted a self-defense focused art, then what you need to do is you need to have forms of live practice that will accurately reflect what a self-defense situation is and how it will play out and all that kind of thing. And as soon as you add in that live testing, anything that's inefficient becomes obviously so. And I think that's part of the problem within the traditional arts. Rather than being honest and open and say, okay, let's test it and see where this leads and what we can improve, what we may need to reject, maybe we need to rethink some things. There tends to be that protectionism. So it's what I call artificial success criteria. So if something becomes right because it's traditional, or it's right because Sensei X said so, or it's right because we've always done that. Whereas I think if you're pursuing the path of pragmatism, and I accept that there are other, people train for art, sport, fitness, enjoyment, all kinds of valid reasons. But if you're training for pragmatism, you have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, I need to open this up to testing. And let's see how this works. Let's see how it goes. Whereas I think sometimes people are scared of doing that because they know ahead of time what the result might be. So they try and say, no, it's good because we said it's good. And I think that's the thing. As soon as you add the testing in, that's when, truth is unavoidable.
And yeah, you're right. And this is a conversation that's going on with a lot of Aikido people. Like, how do we do this testing? And that often the term pressure testing comes into play. My background, I've had more than 25 years of competitive full contact competition. And what I learned over that time is that pressure testing is merely going to perform. It's like a football team going out and actually playing a game. You can scrimmage, you can do your drills, you can do all the practice and conditioning training. But until you get into that pressure type situation, into competition, and then when that happens, you find where your shortcomings are, and then you take that back into your training and you say, okay, these are things that went well, these are things that didn't go well. Now I go back to my training. Let's work on those deficiencies. Let's try to remove them, and then you go and compete or play or do whatever kind of a testing feedback forum you have. You get your information, then you go back to the training site. Like, it's a constant ongoing cycle. It's part of the training. And a good coach will say everything is scrimmage and everything's the real game. Play your scrimmage like you're playing the real game, and play your real game like you're playing the scrimmage. Because you don't want the pressure to be so much in your head that you're what you train well just disintegrates because you're under such high levels of stress. And I think from a self-defense standpoint, that's even more so, because it's more terrifying when you are attacked for real. There's so many more variables than you'd ever get in a dojo or in a training environment. Managing your fear is part of that training cycle, and learning how your body performs under that stress is part of the learning cycle. And the part that concerns me is not only Aikido, but a lot of martial arts that have removed that feedback mechanism. Either they never had it, or at some point it had to get flushed out and just removed, and then the training cycle got smaller, where it was just, you do one thing, Sensei tells you it's wrong, and then you go back and redo it. That circle gets tight. That's what I've noticed, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think there's a few things in there. So I think with the pressure testing as well, I also think it needs to be structured too.
Oh yeah.
So, and relevant to the degree and the level of the student. So you see, I always joke about this at my seminars, but you see some clubs, you walk in, I always say they all look like this, right? They were cauliflower ears. And they'll do this thing where they'll go, oh no, our club is really hardcore. We don't train with gloves. There's no gloves in the street. We don't have mats down. There's no mats in the street. And what they haven't really created a training mechanism. What they've created is a selection mechanism. So students who couldn't fight, just naturally, if you like, will leave. This is a horrible environment. I can't cope. I'm getting injured. I'm going to leave. The students that are left are the ones who are therefore competent. So they then look and say, well, look at everyone in our dojo who can fight well. I said, yes, because you've created a selection mechanism, not a training mechanism. Right. So when it comes to the pressure testing, like, for example, in my dojo, when they're coming as white belts, we have 3-4 basic live drills that they do. And they are super, super basic. What, like simply throwing straight shots while the other one parries in, so they know what shots are coming. It's going to be A or B, and they know how to deal with both, but they'll do it a little bit of aliveness. And then we just get them used to basic grips and moving around. And then we do a little playing for grips with no objective, no winner, no techniques, no impact, just learning to move your hands around another human body when you're at close range. And then when they're ready for that, they do that and they go, oh, I can do this. Oh, great. Okay, now that you feel confident with it, you feel happy with it, he's going to try and tap you on the head. And I want you to try and stopping you from tapping you on the head. And the next stage, well, okay, now we can lightly punch you, and you can slowly build it up over time. So the student's confidence grows, you see. And then what you do find as well is we've created a lot of these gradual pressure testing drills for differing objectives. So I divide it between what I call consensual violence and non-consensual violence. I think they're fairly broad terms, but they work fairly well. So consensual violence is when you have a symmetrical goal with the person that you're training with. So, for example, in boxing, they go, my goal is to knock you out with punches, your goal is to knock me out with punches. Or I'm going to try and throw and pin you to the ground. In judo, you're going to try and do the same to me. But they've consented to it, and they have the same goal as one another. In self-defense, it's what I would call non-consensual violence. So one person goes, I wish to use violence to harm you in some way, take things from you, abuse you, whatever it happens to be. And the other person is, I don't want to get harmed. So the drills that you create, although there is some crossover between the consensual violence drills, it's not the same as non-consensual violence because your goal is different. The criminal wishes to commit a crime and you wish to avoid being a victim of a crime. Right. So, it is quite different. So in the dojo, we have drills for both, because the nice thing about consensual violence is you consent to it. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You know what I mean? So, if I don't want to enter the judo tournament, you just don't enter it. So you can decide, well, we agree to spar in this given way, and we have that in our dojo. We have ways of exchanging techniques for the sheer enjoyment of the martial arts, punching, kicking, throwing, locking, trapping, all that stuff. And then we've got the more self-defense focused ones, where the aim is based on, fundamentally escape. You know what I mean? So that becomes the objective of those drills.
And you've struck on, I think, a very profound thing that a lot of people will say, but I don't think they truly grasp it all the way through. And you clearly do. And that is that asymmetric goal has a profound impact on what that exchange is going to look like. Even if it's you're trying to attack me or you're trying to commit a crime against me and I'm poised to try to stop you. That's different than me wanting to beat you to be a better fighter than you are. Like that's 100%. A whole different realm.
Yeah, entirely different set of goals. And you're right, most people don't appreciate it. So they'll go, and I also think it comes down to people get upset about what works and don't work. They say that's an incomplete question. It has to be works for what? Right. So the things that I would do, like for example, in my dojo last night, we did some footwork drills because we're all socially distanced at the moment. So we're limited to what we can do. So we're working footwork, but the kind of footwork we were doing is a kind of footwork you would use against another trained martial artist to provoke certain responses that they might have. It gets very different. And I think that's one of the other problems with all martial arts, not just the traditional ones, is we become insular. So Aikido guys spend most of the time training with other Aikido guys. Karate guys train with karate guys. BJJ train with BJJ. And so then the objective shifts. It becomes, how can I defeat a practitioner of my own discipline in the area that I am a specialist at?
Right.
And then what happens is you've got these huge gaping holes in your training that no one's aware of. Right. So for take like something like Wing Chun. I would say Wing Chun are the premier trappers. They can out trap trapping all day long. Judo can out throw throwers all day long. They're really good at it. But then you punch a judo player. Whoa, what's this? You know what I mean? There's just some big gap. It's just entirely different. So, and even in the holistic arts, if you look at something like MMA is often pointed as the example, although it's very holistic, it's still focused on defeating another MMA practitioner, and a lot of things don't pass over. Tactically, they don't, and legally, they don't. So the one I always point to is, you look at MMA, quite common tactic is you hit the guy, falls to the ground, they jump on him and start hitting him.
Right.
Well, you do that in self-defense in front of witnesses, you'll go to jail.
Right.
Because, people will confuse it, they'll believe that you are the thing. So you've always got to make, what's my objective? And then you create training drills for that objective. And by all means, have the fun of trying to out-throw a thrower, or out-punch a puncher, or taekwondo guys like out-kick kickers. Great, do all that. But when it comes to the self-defense side of it, we'll all the arts, because the solution will be defined by the problem, all of the arts will end up doing very similar things. So like I would say, so my background's a karateka, your background's an aikidoka. When it comes to the self-defense side of things, we'll be pretty much doing the same thing.
Right.
Then we may move off in other areas to explore the interest of the art and the other sides of it. But that sharp edge, if you like, that fundamental point, every art should be doing the same thing, because the problem will define the solution.
I always like that analogy that they say that no matter what side of the mountain you start on, as you climb, you get closer to the one peak. And I think that a lot of martial artists like staying at the lower side of the mountain, in their little realm that's not connected to anybody else that's around the other side. And one of the things that I like going at it from a teaching standpoint, and I think we're talking a lot about something that Aikido people have been starting to realize, it's not the art, it's how it's trained. It's how we approach our training, that not analyzing, saying this technique is good and this technique doesn't work. It's how do we train these things that in the past have worked, but we've now kind of lost track of that. And that is, especially from a self-defense standpoint, you might only get a few seconds to eye up, okay, what am I dealing with here? Am I dealing with somebody who prefers to grapple, somebody who prefers to kick, somebody who's maybe a striker, or something like that? In a sport fight, you do advanced recon. You know who you're going to fight. You know what they tend to want to do. You know what their background is. Of course, in a real situation, some guy could be 80 pounds heavier than you. Could be, big dude with bad knees. You don't know. This could be, a really good kicker, or somebody who just likes kicking people in the kneecap. How do you spot those things? And then, and I really like how you said, you don't try to outkick a kicker, you don't try to outbox a boxer. Once you get an idea of what he wants to do, how do you be the worst thing that he wants to have to deal with, the thing that he's not ready for? And I think those are important points. They're a little harder to do in a dojo, but starting to identify how to do those attacks and how to be what we would call an uke, which is you're the attacking body, to say, all right, now you're going to be a kicker, or now you're going to be a boxer, or now you're going to be a wrestler, and then be able to have our nage be able to read that and say, okay, well, how would you deal with somebody who's going to do a grappling attack or a kicking attack, things like that.
Yeah, well, and then I think that's true, and this raises two other points. I think on the for the self-defense side of things. This is one of these things that, it really infuriates me, right? Because we've got Sun Tzu telling us, you need to know your enemy. You need to know your enemy. You need to know yourself. And then so we acknowledge that our enemies are criminals, but no one studies criminal behavior. Martial artists reinvent criminals in their own image. Whatever art you do, a criminal will act like that. Well, of course, it's not true. Right? So you could be the best wrestler there is, but the criminal doesn't want to act like a wrestler. He doesn't even want to fight you. He wants to use violence to get his aim. So he'll use dialogue and deception and numbers and weapons and surprise. So those things need to be factored into the training for that element. Because I think sometimes there's an assumption, okay, we're ready to do self-defense now, you know what I mean? And the guy hits you mid-sentence when he's asking you directions. You know what I mean? And he's like, well, what the hell happened there? You may be the better fighter, but he's the better criminal.
Sure.
So there's that side of it, and then the other one is when we start to train things, we also come against the insular limitations. So if a judo club decided, okay, we want to start working punches, no one in that dojo can punch. So what happens is they get good at defending against very bad punches. So therefore, well, this works until you meet a guy with a half decent punch. But the analogy that a friend of mine uses, Jamie Club uses, and I just think it's absolutely brilliant. He said, when it comes to self-defense, he says it's like first aid. It's a life skill. You're not being a specialist, you're not being an expert. It's a life skill. That's the self-defense side of it. He says in the martial arts, what we then go on, then we go to specialize. So you may be the brain surgeon of grappling, or the heart surgeon of punching, or the, whatever it happens to be, the pediatrician of locking, whatever it happens to be, right? You've got this expertise. But that brain surgeon, when someone starts choking in a restaurant, he doesn't whip out his scalpel and start operating on the brain. He acknowledges that those skills are for something else. What the skills that he needs are the first aid skills. So I think these are, in all the arts, and this was the thing I found really liberating for me, is not everything I do has to be relevant to self-defense. Some of it can be relevant to the history, the culture, the sheer enjoyment of it, the joy of physical movement. Some of it can be related to the consensual violence and fighting. And then we've got this core bit, if you like, which is related to the self-defense side of it. And not everything can or should be shoved into that box. We can do things that go, this has no bearing on self-defense, but it's still cool, it's still fun, it's still beneficial, but in different ways. So I always think that's really important. I have this, the model, I call it the martial map, where I've got 3 overlapping circles, like a Venn diagram, where I've got martial arts, self-protection, and fighting. And then I tell people, whatever form of practice we're doing, we need to think where it is on that map. What are we doing now? Are we doing something that crosses over into 2 or 3? Or is it something that's pure self-protection or pure fighting or pure martial arts?
Yeah, I came across your presentation on the martial map a couple of years ago, and I really loved it. And it was, as I listened to you talk about it, I always talked about those the 3 realms of the academic martial art, the sport martial art, and then basically combatives or crazy town. Like that's where everything goes wherever it wants to go. And each one has their specialties, their areas where they are very strong, and each one has its blind spots. And that's where going to the center of that, if you call them circles, or I use it as a triangle, the closer you get to the center of the triangle, you try to get the benefits of each realm, but you avoid that over specialization into one where you're getting blind to the other realms.
Yeah.
And people can argue, and this is another frustrating thing for me, for both martial artists and just people in general. It's like, well, which one's better? They always think in terms of one's superior to the other two. It's like, in its own specialty, yes, but none are superior to the others in every way. So you can't just say that there's one Coca-Cola that's better than any other cola out there. Like, and I just call it plebeian thinking. It's like what the Roman citizens were like when they went to the Colosseum, like which gladiator is the best, like which one's going to win. And they tend to view that because we're steeped in it with, which football team won the championship, which fighter won the tournament, which is the good guy in the movie that killed all the bad guys at the end. We were kind of given this plebeian thinking, but in combat, it doesn't work like that. Even an inferior fighter with superior will can overcome somebody with better technical ability.
Oh, easy, yeah.
And that's, they call it any given Sunday over here in America. I'm sure you got some kind of a similar saying over there in the UK, but there's a difference between that will to win and the skill and the technical ability. And to go too far into thinking that all the reps that you did and all the technical prowess that you've built will prevail when somebody is just that much meaner and says, I am going to take you down without that technical ability.
Yeah,
he can
downright sneaky.
Yeah.
This is it. There's documented cases of world level fighters being taken out by people. There's no way they could face them in a square go.
Right.
But the mistake I think a lot of martial artists make is they make the assumption that the criminal is interested in a square go, and of course they're not. Do you know what I mean? So there's no way I can outfight this guy, so I'm going to wait until he's not looking at me. Then me and my friends are going to jump him. It's entirely different thing. So and I think as martial artists, we're really bad for redefining the problem in our own image. Instead of saying, okay, what's the problem? Then what should the solution be? People start with a skill set. I'm an MMA practitioner, Aikido, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, karate guy, and therefore criminal violence looks like X.
Right.
No, it doesn't. It looks like what it looks like. So start from there and work back. You know what I mean? Rather than saying, I already have a solution. Now let me redefine the problem. It doesn't work that way. Here's the problem. You need your solution to fit that problem. And as you point about which one's best, I always point to like cutlery for that. There's a reason we have a knife, a fork, and a spoon, because not one of them is better than the other. If you go,
That's
which
a great
one's best?
analogy.
Oh, the
I'm
spoon's
so going to
best.
steal that one.
Here's a well-done steak. Have at it. You know, you can bash it into your spoon all day long.
Yep.
You know, and okay, I'm going to eat soup now. Well, the fork's not going to work for you. You know,
Right.
and I think the key bit is people, because I don't believe, I was guilty of this. I used to believe that self-defense was kind of like the gold standard. That was the thing that really gave a martial arts its worth. You know, and I still think that's important. It's an entry-level requirement for me, for any martial art that I'd be interested in, that's something that they do cover pretty thoroughly.
Sure.
But after that, I'm totally happy to go on to all the other stuff as well. You know, because I realize, I mean, like I haven't had it swinging. I've had situations I've had to diffuse even relatively recently, but I haven't had anyone throw a punch at me in anger in years and years and years. So does that mean I've wasted all my martial arts training during this time? Well, I don't think I have, because I find it fun and enjoyable, and it keeps me fit and healthy. I'm in pretty good shape for a guy at 50. You know what I mean? So I see the value in all of that now, and I think that's some of the mistakes martial arts make, is they feel everything has to be related to self-defense. It doesn't. Cover that ticket and then go, right, I've got that, I've done that, I'm confident with that, now go play, go enjoy all the good stuff.
And the word that you nailed there is enjoy. One of the things I think that people perceive is, well, I kind of enjoy my kata, and in Aikido we do it in pairs, but it basically is a kata where you know the formula, the recipe, you go through movements, and they kind of feel like it's comfortable, like this is a comfortable place. But Aikido has been suffering from a lack of popularity, or the popularity has been sinking for the last 15 years. And I personally believe that practice is just not enjoyable enough. Practicing katas is just not very nourishing. It's not pleasurable. It's not enjoyable to a vast number of people. And I think as audiences and as people get a little bit more sophisticated, they also realize it's not very useful. It's just not going to teach you practical things. And the thing that I want to overcome, that practicing like you described, where you say, all right, we're going to go 10% intensity, and we're just going to kind of, you know, we're going to try to sort out the chaos, figure out arms flying around, how do I make things work? As you start getting comfortable with that and you say, oh, I can handle 10%, no problem, let's go to 20%. And now let's go to 30%. As you climb, that's a fun process. You're not getting hurt. You're not getting banged up. This is not like a Conan pit where you're dropping students in and they're coming out with this thing. You don't want to scare them to death. You don't want to drown them with things they can't comprehend. But as they build up confidence, they really enjoy it. I find with my students, when we go through these things and say, you know, my goal is to make you very confident in facing a terrifying situation that most people would just freeze up in. I want you to be comfortable there. And we're going to gradually get to that point. Every single time I see a student, even in one class, come out and say, wow, I can protect my head. I can move. I'm not just going to get nailed. This is great. That's the enjoyable part of martial art training. And I'm sad that a lot of martial art instructors have lost sight of what it's like to empower their students in a way that the students really love it.
Yeah. With a demonstrable empirical skill.
Right.
You know, so I mean, like, so for me, you know, I'm a big fan of obviously the traditional kata, and I do use them as the foundation of this.
Absolutely, you got to use that.
We do the drills, we do the partner drills, we vary the drills, we do them live. You know, they're the central thing. But I'm not adverse to. There's some mornings I'll do my kata, and I just like doing a good kata.
Sure.
That felt nice for my body to do, and that looked pretty sweet, and I'm quite happy with it. But I get fully what you mean, because that's like closed loop training. It's good because of what's been defined as good, or it can become that. So you get people whose kata in the karate world can be beautiful, but they have no idea of how to move with another human being. They've no idea how to adapt the techniques on the fly. You know, and to me, I'm with you. I don't find that anywhere near as satisfying. I'm open to the art, but I don't find it satisfying to do art for art's sake.
Sure.
And exactly like you, these little kind of steps, and you can see these people who enter the dojo with very little confidence, and then you give them these manageable bite-sized chunks as you slowly build them up, and then in a few years, you know that we're doing group scenarios where they're getting attacked by people swinging punches at them, you know, and they come out of it. I mean, the normal reaction is when they're finished, it's smiling and laughing.
Yeah.
You know, they've kind of enjoyed it. They might not have enjoyed it while they're doing it, It's like a roller coaster, right? You get thrown all over the place, or a horror movie. At the end of it, you go, yeah, it's fun. I like the adrenaline of it, if you like. So yeah, I fully relate to that.
And I relate to what O-sensei said, train with joy in your heart. Like, to me, that's what it means. That's the tangible aspect of this should be fun. Like, I can't wait to get to the mat the next time. I can't wait to do that again. And I think in terms of what we are selling, because I think Aikido, along with a number of other martial arts, has a certain identity crisis. Like, they don't know what it is they're offering. Well, any business consultant will tell you, if you don't know what product you're selling or what service you're selling as a business, you're doomed. Like, you need to identify it. And I think that what we've struck on exactly what service martial arts is selling, which is an enjoyable experience that empowers the student. They want to feel like they're confident. You're selling them into confidence and competence. And if we're not doing that, that's why we're losing customers, or that's why we're losing students.
And I think on that one, there's two elements to that as well, because it's a Rory Miller line, which I really like. He said to be able to handle fear, you need to believe you can do something. Mm-hmm. To be able to handle danger, you need to be able to do something.
Right.
So I think some martial arts, I think actually, if I'm honest, I think when it comes to self-defense, I'd go as far as 95% who claim to teach self-defense don't. Even those who teach good physical combatives don't teach legal elements, de-escalation elements, escape elements, home security, all that stuff that's so important that they never even touch upon it. But if you can show someone, say by these measured drills, that you can actually do that and you can do it live against someone who doesn't want it done to them, it's a real confidence builder, not a false confidence builder.
Right.
And I think some martial arts are definitely guilty of that. You know, like knife defense. Here's a little fancy thing we can do, and look how the knife flies out of his hand.
Right.
Great. Try and do that when the guys really want to keep hold of it, and it's coming at you faster than a sewing machine needle. Try and do it now. You know, and very quickly it's, well, that doesn't work. Good, you know, that doesn't work, but there are other things that stand a greater chance of success.
You know, and that's one of those things. It's sad when martial artists find out the hard way how far off track their training has been, and they didn't know it.
Yeah.
My wife told me a tragic story from her past. When she was in high school, there was a kid, and he was, I think, 15, 16 years old, and he had a black belt in Taekwondo or something, and he was stabbed to death with a screwdriver. And he never got, you know, everybody thought, well, he's a black belt, he should be able to defend himself. Like, this should not have happened. But, you know, it cost him his life. I mean, those stories break my heart. And as an instructor, the worst thing I can imagine, the horror that I could imagine, is coming back and having one of my students come back and say, what you taught me, I was totally betrayed. Or they don't even come back at all because they're dead. Like, I take it with
totally agree with that. Totally agree. I mean, I one of the most moving things ever for me was I once had a mother tell me my children wouldn't have a mum if it wasn't for you. Mm-hmm. Because of a situation she was in, you see, and that really brings it home how serious it is on that side of things. We can do all the fun stuff as well, but for that, if we're going to do it, we need to get it right, and we can't place. And again, I think it's another thing, your love of style or your ego or your loyalty to your organization. None of that can come first. Mm-hmm. You have to teach what's empirical. Mm-hmm. And demonstrable. So it's like that the good business, you know. So if I order a plumber and the plumber turns up and says, well, actually, I'm not a plumber, but I'm a great carpenter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't need you. You know what I mean? I've got a water leak. You know
what offense, I mean? But you may be a lovely guy.
And we have uneducated suppliers. Martial artists don't often know what it is they're trying to provide. And then although in terms, I think of things like in consensual violence, I think things like the UFC have been quite helpful in educating the public what will work in consensual violence. I would still say the vast majority of the public are very confused about what non-consensual violence or criminal violence requires. So they'll come in and go, right, I want to learn how to fight like I've seen on TV or in John Wick or on you know, the last UFC. And you go, so okay, if that's fine, if that's what you want to learn to do, find somewhere that teaches that, right? But you're telling me you want to learn self-defense, and if you are, then I have a duty to tell you that that's not what you're after. This is what you're after. You know, and then, you know, and then if it's, well, I also want to learn something culturally interesting and I want to have some fun with it, but being very mindful of what it is you do. So I turn students away all the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
People come in, I want to learn A, B, C, and D. Well, I know a guy who teaches that stuff, but it's not me.
Sure.
But if you want to do X, Y, and Z, then I'm your guy. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that honesty, I think, that needs to be there. And it's okay to say, you know, here's the stuff that we do, and here's the stuff that we don't do. And you know, I've found that, you know, having an Aikido school, when I have people that come and they kind of want to do the spiritual choreograph stuff, we do a bit of that, but I also want to make sure that, you know, my students don't get into thinking that alone is going to be what helps them when they're faced with an antagonist. You know, I like it to be more physical. And one of the concerns, I think, and I don't think karate has this same thing, but we just had a study by Josh Gold over at Aikido Journal come out about the average age of Aikidoka is just getting older and older and older. Like the younger people are not coming in. I think Aikido is kind of going to die out as these people just age and die. And so that affects the practice. Like if you have a bunch of 50 to 70 year olds practicing, it's not going to look like a bunch of 25 to 35 year olds practicing. And I think it's okay to fit your martial art to your own physical capabilities. You know, you're not going to be a heavy duty athlete at 60 years old, but that doesn't mean that a 25-year-old their training should look like a 60-year-old. It needs to form. And that's where I think that instructors, the difference between an instructor and a coach is profound. Whereas, and I view myself more as a coach than an instructor. And just let me define that a little bit, in that I want to coach my students to their strengths and to deal with overcoming their deficiencies, not mine. To me, an instructor kind of goes, here's the entire canon of all the martial art entails. And I'm an instructor because I know all of it. And now I'm going to give you every little piece along the way. And you might not be good at any of them, but you know all of them. Whereas a coach is going to say, all right, you know a few of these, or these seem to be fit you really well. We're going to make you really good at those things that you're suited to do. And I'm not going to worry about whether you know every single technique in the library. I want you to be good enough at a subset of them that fits you personally, so that you're going to be confident when you need to.
Yeah, I mirror that completely. So I have what I call my practical knowledge box and my theoretical knowledge box.
Sure.
So, if you want to discuss throws, I can show you 100.
Sure.
And then you go, okay, which ones do you pull off under pressure? These two.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's the same thing. And I think for the progression, and it's something, and again, this is the thing. If I've got someone who comes to me for pure self-defense, they don't want to learn martial arts, they don't want to commit 20 years of their life to learning this thing, or even more than a couple of months. So in those cases, I'm going to go, right, he's out to do a palm heel strike, he's out to do a preemptive slap, he's a little bit on dialogue, he's a bit on home security. Now you've got two techniques, and you've got some personal security skills, we're done. Because that'll fulfill you for your needs. And I kind of start with my martial arts students in the same way. But then as they start to progress, I go, well, you can learn all this stuff and learn this stuff too. But so they will learn all of it. But there's always that element of, but when it comes to sharp edge, you need to know what's right for you. So one story I remember teaching a throw that requires you to be, it requires a little bit of leg strength, and it requires you to be shorter than your opponent. And I was teaching to this girl who was the exact opposite of that. She's very tall and very thin. So she was, I'd never get this to work, would I? And I went, no. She goes, well, why are you teaching me it then? I go, because someday you might be teaching someone built like me. You know what I mean? So she went, oh, okay, I get it. So all I need you to do is I need you to be able to understand it. I remember my judo coach once, I went to him and said, can you go through Chimata with me? He looked at me, the inner thigh throw, and he looked at my legs and went, why? You'll never throw anyone with those legs. Because I've got fairly short legs, he said. And I goes, I know. And he goes, well, why do you want me to teach it then? And I said, so I can teach you well. And he went, okay, that's a good answer. And then he taught me. But I'm well aware that throw is I can walk somebody through it, and I can show someone the mechanics of it, and I can get them to do it okay. But it's never going to be one for me because it doesn't fit my attributes.
Sure. And I think this branches into how instructors view how they teach. I've seen a lot of them say, all right, every time my students show up, I need to show them something new, because that's what gets them the wow factor. Like you're getting something brand new. And then they think, when I run out of new stuff because a student's been with me for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, now he's going to go up. You don't have anything new. Off I go. And they view that like as part of their business model, and it affects what happens on the mat, where that student who was with them for 5 years, all the stuff, every new thing that they were shown at every class, they can't do any of them well yet because they never spent any time. They'd always go from one thing to the next. Like it's a showcase. The instructor's there to show how much stuff he knows, and to be able to tell the student, well, I've shown you a lot of stuff, but I haven't shown you everything yet. You need to keep coming back because I got more. And I do think though that students don't attach to that much, except to say, I've got a really impressive instructor, and I've been with him for 5 years and I still haven't seen all the stuff he can do. Like they're there for entertainment more than they are for their own skills. And that's almost, I think, an instructor disservice to his students to create that expectation, like this is why you're coming to me. Yeah,
massively so. And there can be more reward in getting them to do something well. You know, rather than teach them 30 things they can't do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Teach them one thing they can really do. You know what I mean? And then that is generally a more rewarding experience. The balance for me, my instructor, my main instructor, who's an excellent coach, he always used to say that good teaching is 80% training, 20% entertaining.
Right.
So, you know, and I agree with that. You know, you make it fun and enjoyable, but and karate tends to have the other problem. And you can't talk about it as one homogenous whole because it's not. But generally, what they tend to do is they will drill a single technique over and over and over and over again to get it highly refined. That doesn't necessarily mean that they start learning to apply it well, because sometimes they're just learning the movement for the sake of the movement. So that's sometimes another problem. And then it gets very boring. Well, I can get that repetition out of them just by, I want you to do this drill. Let's say I've got them work front kick, and I'll give them a drill with front kick, and I'll work till they're exhausted. Right, I've got another drill now, which just so happens to have front kick in it, and they do it again. So at the end of the night, they're leaving, that was great. There was lots of variety, and I'm leaving thinking I'm an evil genius. Well, actually, all you did all night was lots of front kick. You know what I mean? Nice. And it was one of my instructors used the phrase repetition by stealth, which I quite like that. So, you know, there's a balance, I think, where it can be fun and they still do the repetition required to get the skill, but you're not just kind of just mindlessly entertaining them, nor you're boring them to death. I think there is definite middle ground there.
You know, one of the things that I wound up having to do was I totally retooled my test criteria that I inherited from my instructor in the organization that I was in. And especially the first test, because that one to me is what sets the stage. That's what most martial artists go through, is that first time. Like, what is the foundation? And I think this touches on what we're talking about here, which is you build a foundation of that base competence, those few things that is really important for them to know. And then they start branching into, they kind of go up with, all right, what are the techniques that work for me? And I start to get really good with that kind of core competence. But as they train for more years, like you were talking about, they'll start to branch out to, I want to know a little bit about this technique. I probably wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be my go-to, but I want to know how to do it because I want to coach other people, or I want to at least have an understanding of how this works. So there will be that sideways expansion, but it can't start that way.
No, definitely not.
You won't build a foundation that way.
No. Yeah. It should be that, like, I like your analogy. It's like an inverted pyramid as opposed to kind of just straight lines up the side.
Right. And I found that once I took on that inverted pyramid, and I took it on with the attitude of, you know, if somebody went and studied wrestling for 6 months, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 6 months, or boxing for 6 months, they'd have a pretty decent chance of surviving somebody picking a fight with them or attacking them. Like, why can't any martial art do that? Why can't Aikido do that? And I spent a couple of years, whenever I'd go to a seminar, I'd visit other students, or I'd meet somebody that I came across in the Aikido world, I'd ask them, how long did you train before you felt somewhat confident or reasonably confident with somebody attacking you? And I got, at the low end, was about 8 years to 10 years. I had people that were 16 to 20 years that said, I still don't to this day. I'm like, what the hell are we doing if we don't have, if you know, senior practitioners and instructors are not confident if somebody started getting up in their face? And I was like, all right, we need to change this around. So with that, I wanted to get that bottom of the inverted pyramid, because that core competency should be a comfort zone. of, not that you're going to take an attacker for granted, you certainly shouldn't, but to say, I'm not just going to get creamed by anybody because I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, and that was where I wanted to build that foundation to kind of go up, or that, I guess if you took the pyramid down, that was the solid block underneath. Is I want to not be able to, get hit. I want to be able to take some body contact. I want to be able to deal with, the wide variety of real world attacks. And that's something we could touch on from what we talked about earlier, which is, what are we going to encounter possibly with real world attacks? Well, now with all this video all over the place, we can make a study of how do the real attacks go? What are we looking to train for? And that's kind of what I did is go for, what do you see in most street attacks for what somebody's going to deal with? And let's start there. And they don't even need to be all the same things, because I know you guys over in the UK, you guys have got people headbutting all over the place. Like, you guys love that, what do they call it, the Glasgow kiss over there?
Yeah, Glasgow kiss, yeah.
It'll change a little bit here in the US, but we see a lot of big haymakers, a lot of big, overhand right swings. We see a lot of tackles, shoves, some leg takedowns and stuff. It's a mess. Like, well, let's start with sorting out the mess and work on a few basic things and build from there. And I found that students really like it, and they love when we can start turning up that dial from 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%, 80%, and say, all right, I'm going to have a student go get you, you stop it. And that's where that asymmetric thing comes in. And as they do it, initially they feel kind of very nervous, but as they start going through it and start getting confident, they're like, yeah, nobody's going to take me down. And I also add in how to get up if you are taken down. And I'm like, I can do that in 6 months. It's not that hard.
No, really I also, at the far end is at the end of 6 months, the self-defense side of it. I mean, we can improve. We can all improve. But you should have everything covered by then. You're then moving on to martial arts. And the ones who say, well, we'll teach martial arts and then get to self-defense, you've got it the wrong way around. You know what I mean? It's the wrong way around. You start with, and that's what I say. I mean, the training. It's one of the things. If I'm talking with other karate people about the specifics of karate, that can get very nuanced and very technical. But when I start talking self-defense with people, a lot of it's the same old stuff. You know what I mean? The stuff that works consistently in that non-consensual violence world. Doesn't matter what art you do, you'll all end up pretty much doing the same thing. And then when you've got that in place, then go play, have some fun with it.
Right. The other thing too that I noticed as I started adapting my training model into this is, for those first 6 months, it's not like combative school where we don't do any footwork drills or what you typically associate with Aikido. Like, I feather all that in. It's still there. It doesn't need to be a Marine Corps boot camp for 6 months and then we're going to learn Aikido after that. It all goes together. And it's one of those things where I think a lot of people have a misperception of what it must be like to include the self-defense within Aikido, or within any martial art. Like, I'm giving up on all of my extreme technical practice to do the self-defense or combative or however you'd want it, real world violence preparation. It isn't. It doesn't take. You can blend them nicely.
Oh yeah, you can teach them in a parallel way. So yeah, quite, and that's what we do. And I'm always very mindful. It goes back to the martial map thing. When my students are training, I try and be very clear to them. This is what we're doing now.
Right.
So if we've got our guards up and we're moving around and saying, okay, this footwork drill we're doing now, this way of blocking a shot, this is pure consensual violence. You're trying to provoke trained responses, anticipate what they may do. You're trying to outsmart them. You're playing an advanced game of chess. And then we've got the scenario-based training that we do and the escape-based drills that we do. Okay, this is your self-defense stuff. And the kind of, at some points they overlap a little bit, but it's so that they don't use the wrong skill in the wrong context as well. We're always very important to get it. Again, there's a lovely analogy one of my instructors came up with where he said, when martial artists fight other, it's like an advanced game of chess. And then when they face criminals, they are surprised when the criminal throws the pieces at them and then smashes the head in with the board. I really
I'm going to steal that too, because that's great.
Still the best chess player, but the mistake was the criminal's not interested in playing chess.
Right.
but you can do all that stuff. So when I'm talking about feints and drawing techniques and you do this and he'll think you're going to do that, as soon as you're talking like that, okay, this is consensual violence now. If you're interested in this, we're going to play with this side of it as well. Then we'll get the self-defense side of things. Okay, this is how criminals are act. These are the core, simple things that you do aggressively and explosively, not to win the fight, but to escape. That's why I hate the term street fight. I despise it. I used to have a degree of tolerance for it, and that's gone. I think more and more martial art is either intentionally or unintentionally. It's linguistic camouflage. So instead of addressing self-defense, they go, no, we're going to do fighting skills, but it's in the street. Look, I've put on jeans now, and I'm doing it in a car park. Therefore, it's self-defense. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's still fighting skills. It's still martial arts skills. You just change your clothing and the environment. It's trying to get.
I share your frustration with the simplistic view, and one of the simplistic views is, okay, now it's a real fight, so now I'm just going to eye flick and kick in the balls. Like that's going to solve all my self-defense problems, because there are no rules, and I'm just going to go with whatever's banned in just about every sport, and that'll be it. Like, that's not true. And to me, that's where you see the biggest split, or the perceived split, between technical, precise martial arts and real violence. But the technical side does have strength. I mean, that's the reason they call boxing the sweet science, because there's a lot to it. It's not just punching somebody. And this frustrates me with the technical martial artists who tend to view sport fighters as just brutes. Like, oh, I'm just smashing something with my fist. Like, no, you don't really appreciate how technical and how much expertise goes into that art. Like, you're trying to make your own art look better by trying to tear down this other, these other people. Even I hate to use the term, but even bar fighters and street fighters, like, they may not have entered a dojo or done any what you would consider training, or academic martial artists would consider training. But believe me, they've trained. They have a method. They know how to be sneaky. Or
that band stuff irritates me too. I call that one the rules paradox.
Okay.
So you sometimes get people go, in judo they can practice their throws because they put them down on the back, but in my style we drop them on the head. So our throws are more dangerous. So I go, okay, so how do you drill your throws with a non-compliant partner? Oh, we don't. They're too dangerous. Well, the judo guy will throw you all day long with his safe throws. Because he's actually practicing against somebody.
Sure.
But because you're saying your technique is too dangerous to be practiced live, you may find it's not dangerous at all. And people over exaggerate what eye flicks and pokes can do. No one's ever touched an eyeball and go, I quit. I mean, it's part of the mix, and it can change your tactics, but they're not radical game changers by any means. So,
right. Well, and then you ask those very same people, well, how many times have you practiced eye jabs? And they're like,
we have this thing as well. We'll take all of that out. I call it the dirt. We'll take all the dirt out, and then they'll train in a certain way. And I'll go, right, say they're doing a grappling drill, and I'll go, right, I just want you to grapple, play for grips, try and get your partner's back, try and get these certain grip positions. And then I'll say, okay, now what you can do is, if you touch your thumb just above his eyebrow, he has to move the hand away from the eyebrow. So my argument is, if I could get my hand here, I could have got it into his eye.
Okay.
And so there will be a response. Now, it's not going to be a fight winner, but it may create a response that will enable you to do something. We use the belt knot for the groin. So if the person grabs the belt knot, they've now got a grip on your testicles, right? So you better do something about that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So there's those kind of things where you can substitute them in for the tactical side of it, but you can still train live with all of that stuff. You've just got to be a bit creative with it.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think there's a certain, like I said, a blind spot that a lot of academic martial artists will have for real violence or for sport violence. They simplify it so that they can classify it in their head and say,
It's an ego-based justification. It's like I'll create an excuse as to why that's not what it is. But like I said, one of my closest friends, absolutely, you could not meet a nicer man. But in his youth, he was far from a nice man, right? He's a nice man now, but he wasn't, right? And I remember, and a man who's had hundreds, if not thousands, of real fights, because he'd go out and seek them. That was his idea of fun, right? And we're talking to him about what he found, all these hundreds of fights he had, and he had a local reputation as being a guy that you just didn't want to get on the wrong side of, right? Way more effective than 99.9% of black belts out there, right?
Sure.
So I said, so what was it then? And this was it. This was his full fighting system. He says, I'd hit them with my right. If they were still standing, I'd grab them and headbutt them. Going back to your point earlier. Yeah. And if they were still standing, I'd run away. And that was it. Yeah. Like, so this isn't a guy that knows 100 throws, 1,000 wrist locks, infinite punching combinations. He's got a very honed right cross. He's got a strong close range follow-up. And then he's got a very simple tactical plan. And that makes him way more. Now, you stick that guy on a mat or in a ring or in a dojo, he's not going to win ever. But I always liken this, if I'm in the ocean, it's the sharks I'm scared of, right? If I'm on the African plains, it's the lions I'm scared of. If you drop that lion in the ocean, you put that shark in the middle of the Serengeti, I'm not really scared of it. I'll just stand back until it dies, So it's the same thing. It's the context determines who's the apex predator. And that's another thing. I think martial arts have an arrogance. We will be better than any untrained person. Yeah, but untrained doesn't mean unskilled, and it certainly doesn't mean unexperienced either. You know what I mean? So
exactly. I was a number of years ago, a friend of mine who's one of those very dangerous people, lived a very interesting life in some places where a lot of people don't even think exist in terms of violence. And he turned me on to a simple system, kind of similar to what you described, that a lot of bikers will use. And it's basically a simple 3-step: do this, then do that, then do the other. And it works when you've got a half a bottle of Jack Daniels in you, or you just drunk, 2 pitchers of beer. It's so simple, it's so direct, and it's not very graceful, but it works. And that's one of those things where you can say, well, I've been training for, years and years, and this guy, he only knows 3 moves. But in his realm, now you're going into the shark's waters, and it's going to be his advantage.
Yeah, well, one of my instructors realized that his training, he felt at the time, wasn't giving him what he needed. He had a fear of violence, so he threw himself into the deep end effectively and became a nightclub bouncer, right? And then he realized he's got all this martial art training, but he's on the door with people who have a lot more experience of doing it. So they were teaching him, this is how you can spot someone's about to go. Hit them before they do anything physical. They're about to do something physical. The neck pecking, the splaying, the short syllables, all this kind of stuff. So you're going to use dialogue.
The wide open glare.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you're going to use dialogue to deceive them. Ask them an open-ended question. Why can't we talk about this? And when they think of an answer, hit them then.
Right.
And they said, this it worked. They said way more than anything. So when it comes to physical side of self-defense, back to one of my other teachers who also worked as a bouncer, he said the exact same thing. So it's one of this preemptive strike. When you are being physically threatened, but it hasn't got physical yet. And they again, decades and decades of martial arts training, high-level competitors, full contact champions, one of them as well. And they said, this preemptive slap or preemptive strike, that works more often than anything. And I say I can teach that to someone in an hour. They'll have a working version of it. So I don't need to teach them all those advanced skills. I'll just teach them this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the bit at the bottom of the.
That's it. I also wanted to ask you, just to jump tracks a little bit, when you went through this kind of your own personal renaissance of what you wanted your art to be, did you find that you had to swim upstream and take some slings and arrows from the traditionalists, and how did you deal with that? What would you advise people who are maybe thinking about taking on that same breakaway?
Yeah, well, it's one of these things. The time I started doing it was like late 1990s, really. It's when I started publicly sharing books and articles and things, and so at that time, the UFC was coming onto martial artists' radar. So they're going, okay, there's this. That's more, it doesn't replicate the fight, but it's definitely high-level consensual violence. It doesn't represent self-defense, but and also Jeff Thompson, Peter Constein are the 2 instructors I alluded to earlier. In the UK, they were both highly skilled karateka, but they were both saying what people are teaching is self-defense isn't self-defense. So it's what we in the UK we call the reality revolution. Well, that was happening in the 1990s, about when I started coming out with my material. So the pump was already primed a little bit, because you had a lot of traditionalists going, okay, where do we go now? And I went,
it was that crisis of faith, I think, that was brought up.
Yeah, they were starting to, and I go, well, I might have an answer.
Nice.
You know what I mean? So for those who were already asking the question, so that helped. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That really helped me. There was a wave there to be surfed, but from within, I still get it now. Within the certain sections of traditional, because I would debate that with them as well. But within the, there was very strong pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always, I'm not trying to win anyone round, never have, not trying to evangelize. I'm always, okay, this is what I do and this is why I do it, and I hope you find it useful, and if you do, that's great. If you don't, fine, keep on doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But when those guys would push back, you know, one of the things that I would often do is I would quote the old masters back to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, for example, on that one, I would be the guy teaching, you know, this preemptive strike, and they go, oh, that's a, you know, well, okay, let me tell you that Funakoshi, Mabuni, and Motobu all recommended it. And here's the quotes, you know, where they did it, you see. And then it's one thing about, if I can, it's a strange thing with traditionalists. I can demonstrate that something works, and sometimes that's not enough. But if I can demonstrate that it works, and I can give an old master's quote to back it up, now they're interested and they're on board.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that was kind of going back, and also talking about how the old masters were very open to the idea of change and innovation. There's lots of good quotations on that. So when I brought something new in, where people go, whoa, hang on a minute, you're changing the art. It's been changing every second of every day since the moment it was, you can see, you know, it's conceived. It's been in a constant state of evolution. And here's the historical evidence for that as well. So that broke down the doors a little bit then, because people thought, oh, okay, you know, I don't feel like I'm betraying my roots or anything like that, you know.
Well, yeah, and I think that as people go forward, it's easy to think, well, I'll start going that direction when the mass of practitioners are going that direction. But I think you're right. I think there's always going to be holdouts. There are always going to be people that are going to be stuck with where their mind is. They don't want to innovate or expand or look at adjusting their training. And I admit that when I took on adjusting my own training, when I started my dojo, and it took a long time, because I had such great respect for everything that my instructor taught me. I felt that he really didn't waste any time, but I realized, like, maybe there are better ways to teach the same concept, and maybe there are some concepts that just weren't as useful in the time that you spend, that you could be doing something better to adapt new things. And I guess it's kind of like a diet or your weekly schedule. If you take something new in, you're going to have to give up something. Yeah. And it will cause, at least it caused me to really examine, okay, is the new thing I'm going to be doing good enough or better to take this other thing out and replace it? And it took me a while to overcome that feeling of, well, just the respect and to examine, all right, this has to be deliberate. This cannot just be a haphazard approach.
And I think there is that thing of sometimes people feel that they're being disrespectful to those that came before.
Right.
But I think a real good analogy for that is that I use a lot is science. Mm-hmm. So if you look at, like, let's take physics as an example, right? So Newton was the guy who comes up with Newtonian physics.
Sure.
And then they noticed something a little bit. Oh, you're still there. So then they noticed, as I understand it, they noticed something odd about Mercury's orbit and think there's something else going on here. And physics moves on, right? So now the physicists look back at Newton's stuff and they go, you know what, that was really good, but we've improved on it since then. But nobody looks back and goes, Newton was an idiot. You know what I mean? Right. You know, they just accept that. Yep. You know, and the reason that Newton was a genius is we didn't have to redo what he'd given us. Mm-hmm. We started from that point and we're able to move on. So there's that phrase, John of Salisbury's, where he said, if I can see so far, it's because I am a dwarf standing on the shoulder of the giants.
Right.
You know, and that's how I feel. So, you know, yep. I'm not, when I go, I think we can do this a little bit better, that's not me betraying them, it's me fulfilling them. I'm saying they've given me all of this great stuff, and because of that, I didn't have to start from scratch. So very quickly, all that research they did, we've done all the hard work there. And that got me to this point. Now my job is to move it on an inch.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And then the next generation can take it from there. So I'm not betraying it, I'm fulfilling it. So, and you don't get, in physics, you don't get practitioners of Newton rule saying that he knew everything, it's never changed.
I got to write that one down too. I'm stealing that one as well.
Yeah, they just all acknowledge that, that man was a genius. He was an absolute genius. And gave us, the foundation of modern physics. But we can move on in little incremental steps. So
it's
we're not
that cycle of,
an
innovator comes, he creates a new standard. The standard is respected because he innovated it. It's beyond where it ever was. And then the next innovator comes and takes his, and it keeps rolling. But the minute you stop that, I think that's where a martial art is going to start to die.
It's just like, and in no other field does that happen.
Right.
It's a weird thing with us, like a friend of mine says, he goes, no one else looks back to the 1940s as a period of perfection.
Right.
No one says, well, I want a car from the 1940s. Nobody wants that. They acknowledge that things improve over time, but simply because they're building on what came before. I always think as well is, I think of like if you went to, let's say you go to a famous artist to learn to paint, and you start by learning to copy their paintings. Let's say you don't see them for 20 years, and they go, "You're still painting? Oh yeah, look, I can still copy your work." Well, I can do my work. What have you done? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I always think it's like a failure. It's more disrespectful to them to do nothing with it. You know what I mean?
Agree.
To do absolutely nothing with it. To say this art that those past masters put their life and soul into, that they wanted to see survive, thrive, and spread, and be the best it can be.
Yep.
When we can see that there's minor improvements that can be made. Not to make those is taking away all their heritage. Like you were talking about, if these arts die out, well, what have we achieved?
Yeah. There's a quote that I came across from a sensei, and it's one of his more unusual ones because it's not all we got to live in peace with the universe and things like that. But he talked about, I guess somebody asked him, well, you're such a tremendous martial artist. What do you think of your progress? And he basically said, like, I'm just a beginner. I've only just started, and I hope that my students will carry on this innovation and keep going, advancing the art, not just, not just stop with what he had done. And I think that speaks exactly to what you were talking about. Is all the premier fighters that I've known, all of them have said, I've got a little bit of understanding, but what I don't know is so much more massive than what I do know, and they want to keep innovating. It's usually their body that stops them from too hard to play or just age, but they still respect that there's so much more to go. There's so much more, and not just techniques to add, but refinements and new perspectives.
Yeah.
It's
New
like
training methods, sports science is improving.
Yep.
The quality of kit that we've got improving. It's like when in karate they have the makiwara, the wooden striking post. And then I remember in one of my first books I was talking about the use of focus mitts and some traditional martial artists. Well, they're boxers' kits. Why are we using them? But the only reason the old masters weren't using them is because they didn't have them.
Right.
If all I had was wood and straw, then I'm going to hit a makiwara. But if you can get me high density foam and Velcro, I'm going to make something out of it.
Yeah.
And I'd say that, what we wanted in 50 years' time, they'll be talking about all these traditional focus mitt drills that were developed way back in the early 2000s.
Right.
It's trying to move it on in those little bits. And again, not to decry what came before, just trying to do what little thing we can just to push it on an inch. And my grading syllabus is set up that way as well. We have that built in. The lower end they copy because they haven't got enough experience to make an informed choice. But quite relatively quickly, then it starts, okay, you choose this, you do this, you research this, and let them explore their martial arts. I always say this as well, if Ian Rue ever exists, again, I failed. None of my students should be doing what I'm doing in 20 years.
Sure.
Because if they have, then I feel I failed as an instructor. I haven't taught them how to learn.
Sure. You've given them a bunch of fish, but you haven't taught them how to fish.
Yeah, well, I always liken it. I think I use the analogy a lot of seminars. It's like mathematics. If you like so my second youngest daughter, she's 4 years old. She's learning basic maths now, and there's a little bit of memorization, right? So she knows that 2 add 2 is 4. But so she can memorize that, but it's not memorizing it. You need to understand what it represents. Because then if I go, okay, what's 2 add 3? You don't want to go, and that second number's wrong, Daddy. It's supposed to be a 2. You know what I mean? She needs to understand the idea. And once you've got the ideas, then you can add any number to any other number.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so I think in the traditional martial arts, that's the way it should be. We start with these examples. But at a certain point, you may decide, I think there's a better example of this, or there's an easier way to communicate this. the core concepts remain the same.
Sure.
But the way you communicate it and train it can evolve, which that to me makes the art exciting. It's not a free for all. You've got to earn your dues before you can start doing that stuff.
Yep.
And it's not an ego-based thing. We're not changing things just for the sake of claiming grandmaster of your own style. It's literally, masters have took me 1,000 miles. I want to add my inch before I die. That's the thing. That's all it is. Yeah.
Well, and I think in terms of human combatives or hoplology, there really is nothing new under the sun. Any technique that somebody thinks that they've come up with has been done before. But what we have seen, I think, in the last 20, 30 years is a mass innovation in teaching and training and instructing. Like that's where the big work has been done. And the UFC actually has helped. When you need to train athletes, you need to get them fluent quickly. They've learned a lot about how to train martial arts for performance. Yes, it's for a sport, but really they're doing the same thing. It's the training method, not just the techniques that are the aspect. And as an instructor, I think a good instructor will try to innovate their training. Like, what method am I going to get my students up to speed as quickly as possible, as clearly as possible, with teaching them as few mistakes as possible that I have to go unteach them later because I taught it to them wrong in the first place. So
that's it. There's certain traditional, like in karate, we have these 3 and 5 step sparring things, which basically what that was karate guys trying to copy judo and kendo with a training method that doesn't work in karate.
Yep.
In judo it's quite common. I'll move him once, I'll move him twice, then I'll throw him in katas and stuff. So, but those, I learned those for years and years and got fairly competent at them, and never found a demonstrable use for them. You know what I mean? And sometimes people would say to me, "Yeah, but you've done them, so you've benefited from them." And it's difficult to say, would you have gained some of the skills you've got if you hadn't done them? Well, I can say is we haven't done them in my dojo for 20 years, and they're doing fine without them.
Yep.
We've got different ways of training, which get the end result a lot quicker.
And and I've found in adjusting, trying to get some more live drills and playing with different exercises and kind of using my students a little bit like guinea pigs. Like, how can I get this fundamental that I was taught over 6 months? How can I get that built in a student in, say, 2 months? And I've found some success with it. And it just takes getting an innovative way of training the students and trying some new ways of doing it. And some will not work as well as others, but I've found that it is helpful to at least try. If you're not trying, then you won't get anything out of it. You're just going to be Xerox copying the same drills that you were taught. And we know what happens with Xerox copies. You get copies of copies of copies of copies, and now they're illegible.
My same instructor, one of my instructors uses the exact same analogy. He wrote an article called "The Bad Photocopy," and exactly that. With every generation, it gets worse and worse and worse. So it's a good analogy, that.
Excellent. Well, I really enjoyed our talk. I know we're coming up on a time constraint here. Was there anything that you wanted to wrap up with, or?
No. This should be. I hope I've really enjoyed this. This has been fun, but I just hope that for anyone that's listening, if they want to know more about anything or any of the topics I've raised, then I'm easy enough to find. The spellings, the Ian is Iain, which is a Scottish spelling.
Okay.
Fiercely proud Scottish grandmother, right? So I have to have the name spelled the Scottish way.
They love their eyes so much they got to put 2 in there.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And then the Abernathy, it's Abernethy. I know in the US, Abernathy's a more common surname, but it's Abernathy.
Right. And what I will do, I will get the link for that Marshall map. That was a really great podcast, and I'm going to put it in the link in the description.
Well, actually, I hope people like that one as well, because the thing about it, which I'm most proud of, that is it does differentiate those areas, but it doesn't make a value judgment. It's not saying
it's crucial to understand
good or bad. It's appropriate or inappropriate. So in Aikido, you may find that there'll be some people who I just like doing the katas. I find that great. So that's over here on this map, and it has value. Just don't think it's over here on the map.
Right.
Like the karate guy doing his fancy jumping kicks. Lovely. I'm glad you're enjoying them, but they're here. But they're not over here.
Yep. And that's the key. It's no judgment, just understanding the lay of the land and where you want to be with it and being happy with where you are. And that's the thing, like when you realize there's something missing, and I think every martial artist goes through that. If you don't, you're kind of blinding yourself. At one day you wake up, and maybe you were happy yesterday, but today it's, there's something that's missing from what I can do. where is it? Where am I going to find it? What is it? And where am I going to go to get it? Like that's a crucial thing. Anybody that's growing is going to feel that on a regular basis. And
it's
so
an exciting thing as well, because it means you're growing.
It means you're growing. Exactly.
It shouldn't be a terrible thing that you shoot yourself off for it. That's the bit. That's the bit. I can make this a little bit better.
Right. Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Ian. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I can view coming back and having you on again, because
anytime. I enjoyed it. Thanks for talking.
All right. Well, you take care, my friend, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Will do. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for watching and supporting this podcast. Enjoy your training.